Okay, so it's insufficient safety zone.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else that you saw?
Why are they backing up?
Okay, so we talked a little bit earlier about to position your apparatus, so there's a lot of backing up going on there. Yeah, Chief?
Same thing.
Same thing? Yeah, apparatus positioning for sure. Any trigger points? Did you hear anything? Any trigger points or anything like that?
Yeah, wind is blowing that right at us. It's coming right at us.
Yeah.
I can feel the radiant heat.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, again, not past judgment. I mean, it is what it is. Fire whirls and dust devils and things like that, and that sort of those flame lengths and that fire behavior. I mean, yeah. So was there a strategic trigger point like what Kim alluded to earlier? I don't know. But again, this is the kind of stuff we need to be aware of because the buck stops with us at that level, at our engine company level. Okay.
If I could just add something to that there, Brent, too, is like I think we talk about, in the very first session we talked about leadership mindset. It all has to come back down to being a leader for your engine and the task force you're working within and the attitude that you bring to the field. This was firefighting that is not something that we're imposing on that particular fire, but the attitude of being there and anchoring in and drawing a line, it doesn't exist. We should not be playing that ground. You know, and a lot of that takes the leadership from you as engine bosses to maintain the integrity of where you should be and maintain the laces.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've been talking about trigger points, and a part of that, again, is laces being the minimum level of protection for us. Let's talk a little bit about safety zones and escape routes. Basically, like, we have our laces in place, we're engaging the fire, we hit a trigger point, then what happens next? Actually, just back to this one. Again, this is just basic S100 stuff, but say we've got our lookout, and again, on day 2, we will be detailing an apparatus to be a lookout. So we have our lookout. We've got comms, obviously, the C in our laces. Firefighters are working, preferably 2 escape routes flagged, right? Knowing the travel time back to a safety zone. So that's a very simplistic, schematic representation of what we're trying to achieve here. Okay. So this whole idea of safety, again, I'm a history guy. Like the Man Gulch book, it was awesome. It goes back, this whole idea of escaping from wildfire, getting in too deep and having to escape. Really goes back to like the whole Man Gulch and Big Blow from 1910, all this kind of stuff. But basically the bottom line is that as an engine boss, a switched on engine boss, you need to know what the escape plan is, where you're going and where you're going to. And I found this online. This was issued by the U.S. Forest Service just after the Man Gulch fire in '49. And what happened there, this will make sense once I explain it, is that it was a crew of smoke jumpers, 14 of them. They were fighting a fire. It was strictly in wildland, not interface intermix fire. They were operating with some pretty flashy light fuels. Wind came up, fire took off. I think they were punching guard downhill. I can't remember. They were going downhill. Fire came up the hill. Their foreman lit what was called in the 40s an escape fire. So he took matches out, threw it in the grass, created black as a safety zone, stepped into it. The fire blew past him. His 13-member crew tried to outrun the fire going up the hill, and the fire overtook them and killed all of them. He survived. So apparently what had happened, there was a bit of controversy at the time. They didn't actually teach or train escape fires. It was something that he apparently had picked up from native First Nations. Used to do that, like big prairie wildfires, burn like a black area, jump in for safety. He had picked it up on that and did it. But this came out after that fire. One of the first kind of safety bulletins come out in the States. Always follow your foreman's instructions. So as an engine boss, this is to your crew, follow your instructions. Again, one of our 10s right there, remember being calm and collected. Don't let anything stampede you, the words of the time. Always picks an escape route when alone, and if the fire blows up, gets inside the burn, so into the black, or goes downhill or to the safest, most easily reached flank. Again, don't try to outrun the fire. You're not going to beat it going uphill. Never tries to outrun the fire. And then calculates chances carefully, takes advantage of what is out there. So it shows a little stick man in the water. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But again, you see the idea, the whole premise of this, right? This idea of escaping safely, getting away from fire safely, preferably well in advance, preferably after you've identified the trigger points, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I won't go into a lot of detail on this. We've talked about like what is a safety zone quite a bit. There's a process that you can use to identify a safety zone. And again, it is incumbent on you. You should have safety zones identified to you, okay? But again, if you're working in the end of that subdivision, we'll talk about temporary refuge areas in a second, but you're gonna have to have your own safety zones or be able to access the one that's been prescribed for you. So what are the requirements? What's the process? Okay, observe the area, and I'll go through this in each one. Visualize fire spread, identify the safety zone, time the escape. Again, we'll be driving our escape routes in day 2, but we also saw in that video that they can be really delayed. Inform others, so your crew, and evaluate conditions. Chief, you want to talk about this?
Yeah, this is just the safety zone that we identified for 2 task forces working on the Babine complex. It was an open field right off the main road. It was easily accessible. We could park all of our apparatus, and this was burned over the day before. So it was safe, hard ground, and easy access for 2 task forces.
Okay. Yeah, so a good example of what one looks like. Okay, so back to our little kind of our prompts. So observe. So personally observe, if you can, the safety zone and escape routes from the work area. And again, when in doubt, go back to our IRPG, page 1 of the greens. Step 1 of that risk management process is situational awareness. So observe. So visualize and identify. So you want to build a mental picture in your head, so to speak, as what you're going to get for potential fire behavior. So again, going back to your IAP, going back to your briefings, you need to anticipate what's the worst case situation you're going to get in fire behavior and adjust or choose a safety zone that will protect you from that. And you can see in this chart here, we got topography, weather, and fuels. So the 3 components of alignment, as they go along the bottom axis here, the entrapment potential increases, okay? So like, for example, say stable low winds and light litter, flat terrain, your entrapment potential is pretty low. You go get up here though, narrow canyons like we talked about in the strategy fire or the tragedy fires, change of wind, flashy grasses, fire can move real fast, your entrapment potential is really high. Okay, so you got to choose the right zone, taking into account these potential alignment characteristics, fire behavior characteristics, topography, etc. Okay, so time, drive and or walk the time or the route that it'll take you to get to your safety zones. And one thing you guys are going to learn on day 2, we talk about engine companies, the way Chad and I will run it, is that we'll have a STEN, so a strike team of engines, okay? There are situations when that STEN, we don't need a Type 1 engine anymore. They may park, we'll dismount those crews, and they'll be used as essentially hand crews, say put in a guard around a house or whatever. So there could be times when you, as structural firefighters, are acting as sort of like an interface hand crew. So again, like you're not always necessarily going to be in your truck. I mean, even if you're on the end of a hose length, however many feet from your apparatus, you have to be able to time that, factor in that time, how long it takes you to travel. Okay, and we'll look at escape time in more detail right now. Okay, so inform. You got to make sure that your escape routes and your safety zones are pushed out so everybody knows where they are. And like I can't emphasize enough, make sure you flag or otherwise mark them and everybody knows what that marking system is. I've been on a fire where we had escape routes and there was so much tape on the trees, I couldn't tell you if that was the right one or not. And that is, I mean, what is that? That's a watch out. I got to stop, reassess, figure out what the hell I'm doing here because I don't know where I'm going, okay? Evaluate, okay? You need to continually evaluate your escape route and your safety zone. It's going to change during the course of your operational period, so time of day and fire intensity changes. Fire is going to get more intense, at least in our area, in the late afternoon. You got to think about your tactical progress. Say you're bumping and running, you're making good progress down a road, you may out kind of stretch your escape route. It becomes too long then. And again, back to the risk management process there, step 5, it's in that as well. So location, location, location. Do we want heavy fuels downwind, above the fire, or in a chimney, or fine fuels and maybe they're in the black already, at the flank of a fire, or on the lowest ground? Okay, I think we all know the answer. TRAs, temporary refuge areas. Hasn't been a lot on them, historically speaking. They're more of a newer thing. It's come out of the States, from what I understand. Temporary refuge areas. It really comes into play in the interface. And what we need to know about TRAs is that they are not safety zones. They do not replace safety zones in any way, shape, or form. Okay? These are our temporary refuge area. And what I mean by temporary refuge, it may be a structure, it may be the black, it may be an apparatus. Doesn't look like a good choice there. But the idea of the temporary refuge area is that you're in the interface. You're working, your safety zone may be inaccessible, your escape time's too long, or simply not available. The idea behind a TRA is you move to an area that temporarily puts you in a safer, not the safest, a safer position. Okay? When you make that move, you have two choices after that. One, the situation mitigates, and okay, you go back and re-engage. In this case, say you're protecting a structure on the Charlie side. Okay? Fire's burning up, you have like a rank tube burning up to the structure, radiant heat's getting at you, step behind the structure, let the fire pass, go back out, hit it again, okay? You're re-engaging. Or say, for example, and again, we want to avoid this, you're working down in an area, you hit a trigger point, you need to get to your safety zone, but you can't. You've lost, your escape route has become compromised in one way or another. Again, we want to avoid that at all costs. We spent the last 3 hours talking about avoiding that. A TRA, though, you would move into a TRA with the intent of making the next step, possibly to another TRA, but getting to your safety zone. It's just a temporary refuge to get you out of the really shitty fire to get to the safety, okay? And again, whether you choose an apparatus or a structure, I've studied fires that they've used both. The most recent literature I saw was from 2 years ago out of the States on some case studies. Really it comes down to like tactical mobility, like if you're in and where the fire is in relation to it. If you're in your apparatus, you know, they advocate putting on a full bunker gear and having SCBA ready and making that move. You have your tactical mobility. The twist fire, which we just saw, and we saw another case study, they actually were defending structures. A crew took shelter in the structure catches on fire, right? That's obviously a risk with any TRA, but they then moved into another TRA and eventually to their safety zone. That was the intent there, is to get them, they'd already overextended, they were in a place they should have already left, but they used those TRAs to get out, okay? Anything to add on TRAs?
No, other than the fact that if you are going in one and you're not confident in it and you're planning on using your vehicle, the reason why we have the SCBA in there is because the off-gassing, if the radiant heat starts to off-gas the dashes and the upholsteries inside your apparatus, that's going to get you if the fire doesn't, right? So being able to protect your airway while you're in your vehicle as a TRA, hopefully that you're moving quickly afterwards, but that's why they advocate for the pack inside with you in your bunker gear for thermal heat, insult, to ride that out.
And again, I can't emphasize enough, we are not supposed to be in this situation already. Okay, something has gone drastically wrong for us to get into this, unless you're just stepping back to avoid the radiant heat to re-engage. Okay, if you're using a TRA as a stepping stone to your safety zone, something's gone wrong. Okay, I talked about uphill escape routes, and again, this would apply to primarily dismounted engine companies, but also, you know, anywhere where you're having to traverse up a hill potentially. You want to avoid those uphill escape routes at all costs. Firefighters obviously are going to travel at a potentially slower rate than what the fire advances. And like the last one says there, a smart firefighter, wherever that is, knows that fire goes uphill faster. So this picture is from the South Canyon Fire, the book I had in the opening of this session, 1994. This is the crosses, unfortunately mark exactly where those firefighters fell trying to outrun the fire. And this was like, again, I talk about those 5 points in the IRPG about the commonalities in tragedy fires. This was like a relatively lighter fuel type, Gamble Oak, 10 to 12 feet high. It looks green, even though it can be really dry, and the fire just flashed through there. So again, you can see if you actually start looking at these fires, the number of 10 to 18s that were in play there.